Hi, I'm Ben.
I'm Tucci.
I'm Nate. Today we'll be discussing and analyzing the 2011 remastered edition of Shadow of the Colossus for PS3. First, we'll discuss some of the contextual elements of this game, including its development, its genre, technological specifications, socio-historical context, and economic context. Next, we'll have a more in-depth word about the game itself relating to our experience playing it. This will include its narrative, the role of gameplay mechanics, its graphics, and its music. Finally, we'll take a deeper look at analyzing this game and its overall message, including some of the philosophical views of its developers, as well as some of the themes we uncovered during our gameplay.
Shadow of the Colossus was developed by SCE Japan Studio, also known as Team Ico, following their work on the game's predecessor, Ico, which was released in 2001. The game's development team was headed by acclaimed Ico director Fumito Ueda. Ko Otani, the composer, was among the most prominent crew members, previously claiming his fame for soundtracks in the anime industry such as Outlaw Star and Haibane Renmei. Shadow of the Colossus was eventually published by Sony Computer Entertainment for the PlayStation 2, released in 2005. Regarding the game's story, Ueda mentions that there's a movie called The Iron Giant, and for that, I found the English version more moving than the Japanese. I didn't understand what they were saying, but what I imagined in my head was all the more moving to me. I pledged that my game would have no dialogue, a story, but no dialogue. After his work on Ico, Ueda wanted to take his work in a different direction, using gameplay to influence his thematic decisions. He states that the concept of holding the girl's hand in Ico had, at its core, an element of eroticism to it, I thought. Likewise, in Shadow of the Colossus, the deeper theme that lies beneath the many layers of the game is cruelty. Video games seem to require cruelty as a means of expression, and that being the case, I wanted to try and present my own take on the cruelty. That was really the seed idea behind Shadow of the Colossus.
Shadow of the Colossus is classified as an action-adventure title, which is a broad term that hybridizes two very different genres. Adventure games, as defined by AdventureGamers.com in their most traditional sense, challenge the mind with key elements such as puzzle solving, wrapped around a narrative framework. Recent key examples of more methodical adventures would be Minecraft, specifically on the game's peaceful mode, or of any Telltale games offerings such as The Wolf Among Us. In contrast, according to Lifewire.com, action games test the player's physical prowess, challenging reflexes, dexterity, and hand-eye coordination, including breakneck-paced titles such as Devil May Cry or Bayonetta. Action adventures occur when both these elements are present, which is certainly the case with Shadow of the Colossus. Combat against the Colossi do include action elements such as dodging, stabbing, and climbing, but the fights themselves behave as puzzles. You need to recognize the enemy's weakness, such as the Colossus's exploitable attack pattern. Only with knowledge like this can you plunge into combat and eventually turn a battle in your favor.
Technologically speaking, when the game was released, the PlayStation 2 was coming close to the end of its lifespan, since the following year would see the premiere of its successor, the PlayStation 3. However, while many of Sony's followers may have been focusing on the PS3 at the time and looking forward to its eventual launch in the spring, many developers took their understanding of the PlayStation 2's technology and pushed their games to the technological limit with the system. Many popular game titles came out during this time period, like God of War, Resident Evil 4, Devil May Cry 3, Star Wars Battlefront 2, and Kingdom Hearts 2. While the PlayStation 3 promised a lot of new potential for future titles in the next generation of games, Japan Studios understood the technology behind the PlayStation 2 and its capabilities, creating amazing lighting effects using pseudo HDR rendering or high dynamic range rendering that would otherwise be lost due to the limiting contrast ratios with older technology. This allowed the developers to create spaces where a blinding light is pouring into a dark area. Not only that, but with all the knowledge of the PS2's technology at Japan Studios' disposal, they were able to make motion blurs for quick movement, using fur shader to create more realistic fur on the colossi, and even making self-shadows, which is shadows appearing on the character models themselves. By creating a game so close to the end of the console's time, Japan Studios were able to create an amazing game, even if it did not have the new and better capabilities that the PlayStation 3 would have.
Marketing for Shadow of the Colossus was distributed primarily through gaming magazines, television, and the internet, the latter of which Sony used to launch a viral marketing campaign to generate more promotion and hype around the game. It consisted of a blog created by a fictional character who constantly posted about his research on mysterious creatures, dubbed giants, up until the game's release. 5 posts appeared on the blog regarding strange findings around the world, which turned out to be either skeletons, statues, footprints, or even colossi from the game. The discovery of these colossi specifically created much discussion over online forums and was even mentioned on radio broadcasts. The viral campaign ended as a massive success, generating millions of views on the blog and attracting a market to the game leading up to its launch date.
Following its release later on October 18, 2005, Shadow of the Colossus achieved universal acclaim from critics and fans alike, scoring a 91 out of 100 on Metacritic.com, a website that averages the scores of all qualified gaming journalists. The game received many prestigious awards since its release, being crowned 2005's Game of the Year at the 6th Annual Game Developers' Choice Awards, topping Destructoid.com's 2009 list of the top 50 games of the decade, and being retroactively awarded the Best Game of 2005 in 2010 by IGN.com, who rated the game a 9.7 out of 10 with the simple tagline, "The Adventure of a Lifetime." Unlike its predecessor Ico, which has sold a modest 47k units to date, PlayStation 2 users flocked to the game immediately, helping Shadow of the Colossus to 1.14 million in sales, and a re-release in 2006 under the title PlayStation 2 Greatest Hits. Both games were remastered in HD and released for the PlayStation 3 on the same disc in 2011, which garnered an additional 1.31 million in sales, thanks to both games' reputations. Compare and contrast videos showing graphical upgrades and additional exposure over the years through Let's Play videos on YouTube. Director Ueda attributes his second work's success primarily to an enormous scale and gravitas of the in-game universe, stating that ultimately, that sense of scale turned out to be a big hook for Shadow of the Colossus. This idea is clearly conveyed even from the game's original box art, depicting a gigantic colossi towering over the main character and his steed. This factor, combined with the game's clever marketing and Japan Studios' excellent rapport with the gaming community after the release of Ico, launched Shadow of the Colossus to the status of instant mainstream classic.
Shadow of the Colossus hinges on a defeat of 16 colossi in order to save the soul of your departed beloved. You play as Wander, a young man aided by his horse and companion, Agro. You'll set off from a place called the Shrine of Worship to unique locations across the vast, unidentified world. True to its title, the game is paced by your engagement in combat with these colossi. You can only defeat one at once, and can only move on to the next after you defeated the one that you are currently tasked with destroying. Each colossus is defeated by attacking its vitals, which are revealed by your sacred blade. Each one of these colossi are different and pose different challenges or limited access to the way in which you can defeat them. Some require climbing, use of your secondary weapon, a bow, or even riding your horse or engaging with your surroundings to gain an advantage. However, the colossi are not limited in the way in which they can attack you. They are massive and sometimes quite difficult to hang on to, able to crush you at a moment's notice. If you lose health, shown by a red bar at the bottom of the screen, you can recharge some by standing still, but this puts you at a risk for another attack from Wander's foe. Each attack requires the use of stamina, indicated by a pink circle in the lower right hand corner of the screen, from climbing the colossi to holding your breath underwater to stabbing a colossi's weak point. If your stamina runs out, you will fall off the colossus or immediately stop whatever you're doing.
The game embraces a feeling of helplessness against the giant enemies by utilizing an original control scheme that keeps Wander, and therefore the player, off balance. Each colossus has fur that must be climbed in order to reach their weak spot, which is accomplished by holding R1. In order to reach this fur, the player must use all of Wander's movement options, such as jumping with the triangle button or riding aggro by mashing X. Once Wander finally reaches that glowing spot on the colossus's body, the player must stab it by holding the square button to ready Wander's sword and pressing square once again to unleash the blow. The longer the player holds square, the more powerful Wander's attack will be. However, both of these tasks deplete stamina, so the player must find a balance between attacking and retreating or risk falling off the colossus's body. The colossus movement will also stagger Wander out of whatever action he was attempting to carry out, making the timing of each movement critical for success. For example, when trying to stab the torso of the third colossus in the game, Wander will be stunned out of his stab animation whenever it takes a step, encouraging many weaker blows rather than a couple deadly ones. The same colossus will try to shake Wander off its body once he reaches its head, forcing the player into a similar approach while holding R1 for dear life. The tricky control scheme enhances the realism of the fight and and allows each Colossus to control the pace of battle, further heightening the David versus Goliath nature of each encounter.
This feeling is even further enhanced by the third-person nature of the game. Since this perspective allows for a greater view of the surroundings, you're able to see the world around you as Wander climbs up the Colossi. Even when you're seeking out the battles themselves, Wander and Aggro seem small in comparison to the vast world around them. The third person in this game really drives home the idea that Wander is a small entity in an enormous world filled with dangerous, gigantic foes. Therefore, when Wander does eventually defeat a Colossi, the player should feel an overwhelming sense of accomplishment after overcoming seemingly improbable odds. The game's soundtrack helps to facilitate this feeling, switching from a mysterious, subtle backtrack that plays while the player tries to solve the puzzle of each Colossus to a triumphant major one when they come to the solution and can begin their counterattack. The soundtrack seems to react to the player's thoughts and breakthroughs as if to say, "You did it, now go finish this fight." It's a motivating and extremely satisfying shift in tone, particularly during the game's trickier encounters.
All these elements are catered towards ensuring that the game's main focus remains exciting for the entirety of the game, that main focus being the fights and only the fights. Despite featuring a vast world, the game offers next to nothing to engage the player outside of combat. The player has two actions while not engaging with the Colossus. Ride Aggro with the X button and point out the general location of the next Colossi fight with Wander's sword by holding the circle button. Both encourage getting to the next battle as quickly as possible. Occasionally, the player will spot salamanders crawling around the world, which they can shoot with Wander's bow in order to increase his stamina, but this too is an action that, in the grand scheme of things, still only impacts the combat with the Colossi. In general, the formula is simple. When you're done killing a Colossus, find and kill the next one. Rinse and repeat.
As such, the game offers the player no choice as to whether or not they want to proceed with the fights. They simply must, or quit the game. Fighting the Colossi is the point of the experience, but as the story progresses, Wander begins to suffer physical and emotional deterioration. His skin becomes pale, and his hair gets noticeably darker following the halfway point of the game, and the morality of continuously slaughtering the Colossi becomes increasingly questioned in the story's latter half. As such, the player may feel compelled to stray from the quest laid out for them, but that choice is not available. The game forces you to keep fighting, even if the player no longer feels that it is in their best interest to do so. Shadow of the Colossus' story is a cryptic one, leaving much open to player interpretation and thus presenting myriad different viewpoints on what the game, specifically the shocking ending, could possibly be aiming to convey. By the game's conclusion, our group specifically felt a tremendous sense of loss, guilt, and introspection as to whether or not our actions as players were the correct ones to take within the context of the story. After hours of brainstorming and questioning the game's rhetorical devices, this is how we've collectively interpreted the game's message. Shadow of the Colossus conveys that single-minded desire for a goal will lead to many sacrifices along the journey that, in the end, far outweigh the reward and deplete one's humanity, even changing the nature of the original goal itself, depending on the consequences of those same sacrifices. One of the primary examples of Wander sacrificing something close to him in order to reach his ultimate goal of saving his beloved, Mono, is witnessed through his relationship with his horse, Aggro. Throughout the adventure, Aggro is Wander's sole companion, his best and likely only friend within the context of the gameplay. Oftentimes, he will require his steed in order to progress in his quest, not only to quickly reach Colossi fights, but also to defeat several of them, including a sand serpent that's far too fast for Wander to combat on foot, and a flying Colossus whose vitals Wander can only reach with the assistance of Aggro's speed. Over time, the player forms a bond with Wander's horse and quickly learns to call out Aggro's name as a crutch whenever they're in a difficult situation. However, in the journey leading up to the final boss, Aggro tragically sacrifices herself to selflessly hurl Wander across a collapsing bridge. She plummets to her apparent demise, and Wander is left alone for his final Colossus encounter. When the player resumes control after this sequence, they can still press the X button to call out for Aggro's assistance. Of course, she cannot respond. Here, the game is questioning the nature of Wander's entire quest, stating that the ends might not justify the means, and that Wander, in a single-minded drive to revive Mono, may have lost a companion equally as dear to him. The sacrifice of Aggro may not have been worth Dorman's vague promise to resurrect Mono, but Wander, and therefore the player, was too blinded by his desire to realize this and put Aggro in a lethal scenario as a result.
Of course, at the end of the game, it is revealed that Dorman had been deceiving Wander throughout the duration of the adventure, using him to free the 16 pieces of his soul hidden in the bodies of the Colossi. Wander's body, cursed and decrepit, is assimilated into the demon, seemingly beyond saving. Dorman chases away the sages come to prevent the calamity, but not before getting sealed away once more, this time for good as the bridge to the Shrine of Worship is destroyed. However, trickster though he may be, Dorman remains true to his word. He revives Mono, who wakes up to find a baby version of Wander and takes him to an unspecified location within the shrine, seemingly their new home. Wander has gained his wish. However, this turn of events speaks volumes not only to the tremendous sacrifices brought by desire, but also by how compromises alter a person's final goal itself. Similar to losing Aggro, Wander's foolish determination has effectively alienated him and Mono from what can be assumed to be their friends and family back in their homeland, condemning them to the cursed land of the Colossi. This sacrifice forces Mono, left with only an infant Wander, to care for the child in this new mysterious world. Instead of living together as friends or lovers, Mono must now fulfill a parental role to an otherwise helpless child. The nature of their relationship, and thus Wander's final goal, has changed. Wander may have accomplished his task, but the sacrifices he made along the way irreparably altered them and changed the dynamic of his desire, showing the tremendous cost of sacrifice and foolish nature of single-minded lust. This theme is clearly conveyed during the final instance of player control, where they try to direct a doomed Wander to Mono still sleeping, while being absorbed into a vortex with Dorman. Cursed and misguided beyond repair, Wander in the player's hands cannot reach Mono no matter how hard he tries, making his original goal unattainable as a direct result of his numerous compromises he made throughout the game.
As previously mentioned, at the game's conclusion it is revealed that the Colossi were in fact beings for good, meant to contain a great evil and prevent chaos throughout the land. But Wander killed them and unleashed Dorman's soul into the world for the purpose of his own selfish motive. Wander deliberately stole the sacred sword from his homeland and disobeyed the direct orders relayed by his elders to stay away from the Shrine of Worship, proving that he was taught the danger of working with Dorman and agreed to do so anyway, throwing away his conscience in favor of saving Mono's life. As a result, the world nearly plummets into darkness, showing how a single, selfish goal can motivate a person to commit unspeakable crimes if their desire is strong enough. Furthermore, it can also drive them to savagery as witnessed in several of the Colossi fights themselves. Multiple Colossi appear docile initially, and do not initiate combat until Wander strikes the first blow. Even then some, like the Flying Serpent as mentioned before, do not attack him at all. There's even an instance where the player must take control of a blind Colossus, directing its movement through sword strikes to a certain part of its head. Essentially, the player, as Wander, deliberately seeks out and leads a blind, innocent creature to its doom. These encounters, combined with the endgame revelation about the Colossi themselves, speak to the brutality humanity is willing to resort to when faced with enough of a motivational goal, as saving Mono's life is to Wander. Music also plays a crucial role in emphasizing Shadow of the Colossus' single-minded nature throughout the course of this game. Aside from being heard in a few cutscenes, music only plays when you approach the Colossi. This clever spotting technique employed on the soundtrack prompts the player's action and further emphasizes the game's single-minded nature. Shadow of the Colossus will only yield something or progress if you engage with the Colossi. The music fades if you find yourself distanced from these Colossi and changes in its character as you progress in each battle. Whether you engage more directly with the Colossus or are drawing near to the Colossus' defeat, the music will signal this progress and airs on the more motivational or triumphant style as you battle and gain the upper hand. However, at the end of the game, this more heroic shift doesn't occur during the final boss fight. The music remains fixed in a meandering, somber tone and minor key. This marks the futility of Wander's quest after having weighed the consequences of your actions on both yourself and the world around you. In this battle, the game relays a sense of exhaustion and defeat through its music.
Throughout the game, Wander's stamina will gradually increase as the player hunts down more Colossi and collects more salamanders crawling throughout the world. One would think this would greatly assist in the game's final few encounters once difficulty ramps up. However, we found that Wander oftentimes had an excess of stamina, and we were rarely worried about falling off the Colossi or running out of air when swimming underwater. We did experience difficulty while fighting the game's final boss, but it was less that we lacked in stamina, and more so we simply couldn't figure out what to do after beginning to climb its arms. Once the solution became clear, we once again found that Wander's stamina level was more than sufficient for completing the encounter. Since stamina is offered as the sole reward for killing Colossi and salamanders, and its importance by the end of the game is fairly limited, this begs the question, is the reward for killing these creatures worth the sacrifice of doing so? According to our experience, the answer is no, providing even further evidence of the game's overall theme that sacrifice on a tremendous journey such as this outweighs the quest's final reward, which in turn causes the player to question the morality of their actions.
In conclusion, these themes present in Shadow of the Colossus center around the idea of individualism and how the sacrifices we make on the journey to success taint the final goal and change the individual along the way. In a real-world context, as Western players, we can interpret this to be a commentary on the competitive nature of Western culture and how we may be willing to make many sacrifices to achieve an end goal. Particularly in a capitalist-driven society, individuals are increasingly motivated to reach success with a lack of regard for morality and ethics, willing to abandon the people and things that have helped them along the way. In such a system, the individuals who selfishly pursue their desires gradually become different people as the journey progresses, and the nature of their goal can change as a result. Thank you for watching! We hope that you enjoyed our video on the contextual elements, gameplay, and analysis of Shadow of the Colossus. It truly is a phenomenal video game, and though this isn't strictly a recommendation video or journalistic review, we hope you give this classic a playthrough if you have yet to experience it. The beauty of Shadow of the Colossus is the way it emotionally resonates with the player long after the credits roll, and how everyone can interpret the story differently. We truly believe no one should miss the adventure of a lifetime.